Pete Mazzine with us today. Pete's an individual, I'm going to let him introduce himself here in a little bit, that has really been instrumental in bringing some opportunities to the real estate market that traditionally has never existed before. So before we get too much into the topic of selling solar rent payments, wind rent payments, first I'd like to let Pete introduce himself. So Pete, if you'd feel free to go ahead and take the floor. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, tell what you do day in and day out for a living, and tell them a little bit, if you want to, a little precursor to some of the more detailed discussion we'll get into, some of the deals that you've been working on currently and in the past that deals specifically with the topic of solar payments.
Sure. So I'm Pete Mazzine. I'm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Currently the Senior Land Investment Advisor for National Land Realty, and have been involved in the land business for many years, both as a broker and as a principal. So on the brokerage side, we're working with third parties, helping them, sell and buy tracts of land, either for development or agricultural investment, transitional type like land tracts. And then on a principal side, family ownership in timberland, ranch land, farmland, kind of throughout the country, and then some development work, through single family, multifamily, commercial real estate type transactions. So kind of had a broad exposure to the land market, over the years, and have seen it from, both sides. So transactionally as a broker, and then on the other side as a landowner. And, recently, I would say in the last, 4 or 5 years, have gotten more involved on the renewable side. First starting as a principal, we were approached by a major solar developer a few years ago about a farm that we own in South Carolina. And we entered into a lease agreement with them, negotiated the terms of that, and really got to see what it was like on the other side, negotiating over a potential large-scale solar farm. And then once that is done, there's a lot of waiting and treading water, hopeful that the project is ultimately going to be commercialized and you're going to start receiving that income stream. And then, as I, gotten more and more involved in it, understood that cash flow that is associated with that solar project is then an asset that could be sold, traded. It qualifies for 1031 treatment. And at that point, we were actually able to sell to a third party and do a 1031 exchange. So as I was learning more about that and became kind of partnered with Greg, or doing more and more with Landgate, realized that the opportunities out there for real estate professionals to act as a fiduciary for people that are kind of in my shoes, or were in my shoes as an owner, what kind of counseling could that owner potentially get from land professionals to sell that income stream, and answer questions as to why would I want to, if I've kind of hit this home run and have a project that's approved on my property, why would I think about, selling that income stream and then doing something else with the proceeds?
Very good. Thanks, Pete. What I'll go ahead and kick things off, and really what we'd like to do during this webinar, and Jordan, please be conscientious. If anybody has any questions throughout the webinar, wants to add a comment, feel free to do so in the chat. Add a question. Pete is very experienced in these types of deals and is a really good resource. And us in general, what Landgate is, just for people on the call who are not familiar with us and our organization, we are a data analytics platform and a marketplace for all types of different real estate, from people selling land, people selling cash flows and lease payments for solar, wind energy, carbon credits, oil and gas, minerals, things like that. We're kind of a one-stop shop for all of those different types of real estate services. And we offer those services to landowners, to real estate professionals such as Pete, What's unique about us, for anybody listening in the real estate industry, we do not take any commission from any of your deals. We are not a broker. You guys are the brokers if you're a land professional. Landowners, if you'd like to post a deal on Landgate, there is no fee, there's no charge, there's no commission there. So we are truly neutral, open marketplace, and a great resource to folks out there that are dealing with land. So that's us in a nutshell. Before we get into it and let Pete kind of give some more details about, how these deals kind of, and how you, I do want to cover quickly.
Oh, I think we lost Craig, but he'll be joining back very shortly.
I guess I would jump in and say, for those of you that hadn't been involved in kind of the solar side or the renewable side of deals within the real estate world, and I think we're focusing obviously on solar today. It's hard to get new solar projects approved, and I receive a lot of calls from landowners or even potential investors that say, hey, look, we'd like to buy land that has a strong potential to be developed for solar. And the answer to that is it's very, very hard, even if you are a developer and understands all the components or attributes that a property has to have to be developed for solar. It's still hard to weigh odds on what projects are going to get to the finish line and what projects are not going to get to the finish line, because it can be arbitrary which ones move through and which ones do not. So there are some very clear things that you're going to have proximity to a substation, proximity to a utility line that has capacity. You have to have a utility that wants more renewable as part of their energy generating capacity. So all of these things that are important, that you're going to have that bottom line, and then add on top of that approvals at the local level, state level, and that can take 3 to 5 years. So it's a tough strategy to say I'm going to go out and buy properties that I think ultimately are going to have a higher and better use for solar, because even the people that do this day in, day out don't know for sure which projects are going to get to the finish line. So what we're talking about today is the projects that end up under lease option, work their way through that process, and ultimately are what they call commercialized. And depending on who the lessee is, they may use commercialized, they may use moving into kind of the primary term, but it's the projects that make it through that 3 to 5 year process, and then they start moving dirt, meaning that landowner is now going to be receiving rental income from the solar developer or the tenant as the project is built out. And the primary term, it can vary a bit, but you're usually talking about a 20-year lease with some options built into it. And it's based on a per acre rent, and there'll be escalations built in every year or every 5 years. So that income stream is very predictable over that initial term of the lease, and then whatever escalation or options there may be after that. So oftentimes, and the first thing you should say, or the first thing is congratulations to that landowner, because not all of these projects get approved. So in their mind, and truly, they have, what do we call it, hit the jackpot or the lottery, but they have a lot of value associated with that property that they had not before. So the first thing is congratulations. Then the second thing is, have you read into the lease in a way that you understand the risk associated with this cash flow long term? And even if they have, and they had negotiated really hard when they had signed the lease initially with the developer, the devil is in the detail on these agreements, and they all have clauses where they can get out of it should the project no longer be economical, or they shouldn't be able to, or they couldn't renew their power purchase agreement. So the receipt of those future dollars is not 100% guaranteed. Like if you were to win the lottery from, the state of Florida or someplace where you chose to take it over time, and you feel pretty darn comfortable that they're going to be solvent. And if it's a 30 to 40 year payout, you're going to get all those payments. You're going to get all that income stream. So that's where, as real estate professionals, you don't want to take away from the fact that they have hit a home run, but you also want to say, look, there's a way for you to take that risk off the table, sell that income stream to a group that underwrites risk differently than you might as an individual or as a family, and then reinvest the proceeds of that income stream, that present value, in something that you do have more control over. So whether that's more farmland or a strip center or a triple net leased replacement property, or even a Delaware statutory trust, that the sale of that income stream structured correctly qualifies for 1031 treatment, and it allows them to take that windfall and put it into something, again, that they have more control over. And again, the challenge is making that segue or talking to them about it in a way that doesn't make them say, well, what is this guy talking about? This is a 40-year annuity that my grandkids are someday going to have, because that's truly not what they have. What they have is clearly great, but that's not it.
Yeah, Pete, that's really good. And I apologize again, having some technical difficulties here, but again, you guys are in amazing hands with Pete. I think that's something that is really important for those landowners to get across. Is that's something you mentioned. It's not a guaranteed cash flow, and they can take that, move that into an asset that's actually backed up by something that's tangible. And I do want to share very quickly an experience that I had working with a very, very large landowner in South Texas. Had a extraordinarily large number of turbines on their property, and they looked at it in a way that they have a lot of oil and gas assets as well, and they were looking at it as, okay, well, this is an annuity, something that we can pass down to the kids, our grandkids, and this is going to keep churning revenue. Well, they were looking at those wind turbines and those oil wells a little bit differently. They're not the exact same thing. Whereas an oil well is going to keep churning as long as it's economic and that wellbore is stable, it's going to keep generating revenues. The wind turbines were a little bit different. They got notification one month that over 40 of their wind turbines that they were being paid on had just been decommissioned, meaning they were gone. So any future cash flows that they were anticipating getting from those turbines were gone, right? So not a lot of folks have, hundreds of turbines on their property, but the fundamental financial implications are no different whether you have one turbine or you have 5 acres of solar panels, or if you have 2,000 acres of solar panels. So that's a really good point that people need to be aware of. It is not a guaranteed cash flow stream. So Peter, what's one of the things, and you've been very successful working with some of your previous clients, some of the folks that you knew through your own personal network of what you do as a land professional. What do you think, and what do you hear from these folks right away when you have those initial conversations? How do those initial conversations go, and how do you get them to the point where they look at this cash flow stream and they say, this is something I want for the rest of my life, I'll never get rid of it, to letting them come to the realization that actually, from a financial perspective, this is something that I really needed to diversify and get into something that's a little bit less risky. So how do you go about having that first initial conversation?
But I think building trust in any transaction is going to be key. So, you don't want to come in, as I said earlier, somehow, saying, look, you don't know what you have, and have you even read the lease? I mean, that's not that obviously is not going to go very far. But if you can build a rapport with them, and again, be congratulatory in the fact that this is fantastic, but then if you can get them to share the lease with you, and you can point out some of the vagaries in it that make it so that they do understand, like, at the end of the day, these agreements are really at their will. And as soon as the dollars don't work, they can walk away from it. And, the odds of a big project falling apart and there being early termination in the first 15 to 20 years is pretty low, because if you're going to build out a 75 megawatt deal, that's going to be $100 million, and there's going to be lenders involved, and there's going to be so much underwriting, done in preparation of the project being built out, and then with the operations of it, from that point forward, something catastrophic would have to happen for it not to play out. But after that 15 to 20 year kind of initial period, and that a lot of times will mirror what the power purchase agreement looks like, that term, who knows? And I don't know, the developer doesn't really know, certainly the landowner doesn't know, because what is the useful life of these panels? Is it 20 years? Is it 30 years? What does U.S. energy policy look like 20 years from now? What type of credits will there be out there? What is the appetite for local utilities going to be for renewables? So I'm not one to go out and say, look, this thing's probably going to terminate after 10 years. That's unlikely. But, after 20 years, I don't know. And if they're banking on it being a 40-year payout, that is just that's where it's that fine line to be saying, look, that is absolutely not the correct way to look at it, but have them come to that realization that, this thing can be canceled. And at what point do I want to think that my grandkids are going to get a payment in year 38? Whereas if we take a present value from some, third party, call it a pension fund or some larger group that wants to have renewables as part of their portfolio and is willing to underwrite risk in a different way, that you can then take that money off the table, reinvest it in something that you have more control over, and that that is not all of a sudden going to turn out to be a zero, and just make that choice. And if you can have that conversation with them and they've come to the realization that year 40 is not at all guaranteed, year 35 is not all, not guaranteed, but I can take that risk off the table and have something that is guaranteed. It's probably not going to be as big a return, like cash return, straight up, but that they'd be able to reinvest in. But even so, it's longer term and much more certain.
Yeah, those are really good points there, Peter. And one thing that I do want to stress, and because that's the question we get from a lot of landowners, Pete, is they're shocked when they figure out that they can sell those payments separate of their land. Because most landowners who have, especially in the wind turbine section, because it's not as intense, they're still grazing it, they're still farming it, they're still using it for recreational purposes. They don't really want to sell their property. They don't want to sell the land. Right? They see what land values have done is basically just based on appreciation over the last 5 or 6 years, and they look at it and say, well, this is the best investment that I can make. I want to go buy more land. I don't want to sell my land. I want to sit on the appreciation. And this really provides them a really nice vehicle to be able to take something that they've generated new cash. And you said it exactly right. It was really well put, Peter, that they've won the lottery. They really they've made the right decisions, and they've generated far more value for their land than if they would not have entered one of these leases. The next question for them really, and that's where, working with folks just like you, Peter, they can really help understand how can you maximize the value on this, is taking that cash flow and putting it into other land that'll basically sit and appreciate on. And one thing that when we talk with landowners, that really gets them to understand that, you know, this isn't really this, it's really nice cash flow, but there's maybe another way I need to be thinking about it, is just the tax implications of some of these folks that are basically generating this cash flow on agriculture type land. Well, it's going to put them in a different, for the most part, a different tax bracket, which is going to be significantly higher. And they don't really consider, well, if I'm at a 30% tax bracket now because I've put 150 acres of solar panels on my farm, that's something right off of the top. And they run those numbers. Well, over, you know, 20, 30 years, I'm going to make, let's say, $8 million. They're not going to make $8 million because right away there's 30%, put them in a higher tax bracket. They're going to lose 30% there. But then you factor in the inflation problem there of what, you know, I just bought a new Dodge pickup, and what a new Dodge pickup cost 8 years ago. Boy, I would have loved to have that price today. If I was paying with that with a solar or wind payment, well, my solar wind payment went up 1 or 2% over that 8 years. The cost of that, the real cost of that Dodge pickup went up probably 20 or 30%, right? So it's really just once a land professional like yourself, Pete, and I've seen you do this, I've seen some other folks out there doing this, once you walk them through of what the cash flow is, and it's a great thing, it's a very good thing for them and their families. But once you walk them through what that cash flow is and what that cash flow is not, then it really gets the wheels turning. It's like, okay, well, we want this to be a long-term benefit for our family, for our kids and our grandkids. Working with folks like you, and that's what, you know, I'd like you, if you could, maybe just even maybe some of the deals you've worked on or some of the deals you've heard of, you know, they've had this cash flow. What are some examples that you've seen of landowners taking that cash flow and putting that to work in a DST? And you might want to, you know, give a brief summary, kind of what a DST does and how that diversifies things, or even putting it into other farmland, like maybe some more specific examples of, you know, they took this, they put it into this, and give us a little bit of a breakdown there, Pete, because you're very good financially, of what that means on a long-term percentage. If I'm the landowner and I have this cash flow, Pete, what other options do I have for my kids when I want to pass this lease payments down to them? What are other options if I'm looking at that from a landowner's perspective? Why would I sell this stuff now and pick up another hard piece of real estate? And what is the implications for me and my family on that?
Sure. I mean, well, going back to the tax implications, that would be, you know, the first, and that if you're going to receive this income stream over time, that's ordinary income, and you're going to pay it at ordinary income rates. You know, if you sell the cash flow in lump sum, and just again, to be clear about how that qualifies for 1031 treatment, if you sell, let's say you have, you know, 500 acres that is leased by a solar company, and there's an operating solar project on it, and they're paying rents. Well, if you sell the 500 acres along with, you know, the lease that they have, clearly that is selling real estate, and that qualifies for like-kind treatment because you're selling it in fee. You know, it's like selling a shopping center that has a lease with a grocery store. That qualifies for 1031 treatment because you're clearly selling an interest in real estate. There is a structure that will allow you to qualify for 1031 treatment, but not sell the underlying dirt. And then, you know, that is probably the best way, you know, for most landowners to consider it. And what it is you would be selling the cash flow, but you would be selling it also subject to the conveyance of an easement to whoever the buyer might be. And that easement would be for over 30 years, and it would be for the production of solar power. So the easement qualifies for conveying an interest in land. It's for real estate. And as long as it's over 30 years, it allows you to qualify for 1031 treatment for the IRS. So once the project wraps up, whether it's through early termination or it goes full term, that easement would revert back to you as the landowner. So you will have retained the interest in, or the ownership interest in the dirt underneath that project. And if you, had sold that, the easement along with that cash flow, it would revert back to you. So you'd have full fee simple interest at the time the project wrapped up. So the beauty in that is, you would have sold the revenue stream along with this easement for lump sum today. That qualifies for 1031 treatment. So you either buy more farmland, buy into a DST, which is a Delaware statutory trust, which is, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's like a tenant in common structure where there's a sponsor that puts together a portfolio of real estate, and it could be multifamily, industrial, medical, kind of whatever they see as a niche in today's market. And it may include, a multifamily project in Charlotte, a multifamily project in Charleston and Austin. The idea is put together, a solid portfolio with some geographic diversity that has reliable income stream and an upside, for appreciation over time. And if you had $1 million to, invest coming out of one of these 1031s in it, or a $50 million portfolio, you'd be buying into that DST, pro rata your ownership shares in that portfolio, and it spins off income based on your pro rata ownership interest in that DST. The income from it is derived through the rents that whatever product type is within it, and they usually have a life of about 7 years based on limitations for them, how they can finance it and re-leverage. So you're usually buying in for about a 7-year term, at which time, when it wraps up, you can roll into another DST, or you can actually roll into some other piece of like-kind property. So just because you do a DST one time doesn't mean you can't reinvest in farmland or something else down the road. But what you're doing is deferring your capital gain, which, if you sell the revenue stream, it's capital gain, not ordinary income. And it just, again, allows that you're diversifying at that point, because you're kind of taking that money off the table, putting into something else. And especially in the case where they're retaining the underlying dirt, that is going to be appreciating over the term of that lease. And when the solar project wraps up, you then can, take advantage of the fact that that farmland has appreciated the way that it has traditionally over the last 50 years, where it's outperformed almost every other major asset class. And at that point, maybe it's a residential subdivision, maybe it's just agricultural land that has appreciated the way that we will all anticipate it to. So that's, again, if you look at a legacy for your family members, that you've retained the dirt that there may be some emotional attachment to, but there's an economic component in that it's appreciated. And again, the trajectory for farmland is almost always like this. That's what makes the internal rate of return of institutional farmland, just solid over the course of years. Relatively low cash flow, but a predictable appreciation over time. And then meanwhile, you've taken that risk of, hey, are we going to get paid in year 30 on this thing, and reinvested in something that you're going to get paid, and that you're going to have some say in, like, do I want to buy more farmland, or do I want to buy into a DST? Or when this DST wraps up, do I want to, buy another DST? It just puts you in the driver's seat, or puts that client in a driver's seat. And I always feel like especially in these scenarios, you can talk very factually to these owners, and they may still say no, but you do know when you go to bed at night and they go to bed at night, you brought up a lot of things that they can't pretend that lease is for 40 years, because it's not. And they can't pretend that they know what U.S. energy policy is going to be in 20 years. They don't know. Nobody knows. So what you're doing is just making them think hard about it, and then being importantly, you have to have them understand, like, if you sell, here are the opportunities. And because there's always going to be two sides of a transaction. You sell, you buy. So I sell for this, I buy. So what is it that what's the strategy after I sell? And you have to be prepared to have those conversations, because that's how you get people to transact.
Very good, Peter. Very good. I see that one of your colleagues, Wayne Dunson, another very high-performing National Land Realty agent, has a question there, where I know, Wayne, you've been working on quite a few deals right now down there in West Texas, and you've got some deals in place, and looks like you have some deals where 20-year primary term with what's probably a couple 5-year renewal options. So when people would look at making you offers, and Peter, you can confirm or see if you've seen the same thing, they see how much in this lease, how much time can they possibly encumber this property to buy those lease payments. So they're going to include those optional years. So you have your 20-year primary term, and then you have your additional 2 5-year options. That makes it a 30-year contract. Essentially, and Peter, you confirm or deny here, the IRS would look at that and say, okay, if you can buy potentially 30 years of cash flow, because that's what they're essentially buying. I'm going to buy this lease payment, and there's potentially 30 years there, and some of them go quite a bit longer, go 35, 40, 50 years. That's the term that they're actually buying. And from my understanding that is what the IRS is determining to qualify off the 1031. I've seen several times where people have gotten through their lease payments, and let's say they're on year 15. Some of the folks that have listed stuff on Landgate for wind turbines, some of these turbines are 15, 20, 30 years into their life, where there's only so much time left. Now, there's options that can be done there. One of the really creative ones that I saw was the landowner working with a land professional came up with an idea where they would sell in an option 1 acre or 2 acres of the actual real estate in an option payment. Whereas after 30 years, the landowner has an option to buy those 2 or 3 acres back at a negotiated price, or already price to be determined, right? But that allows that to be an actual real estate transaction and qualifies it for the 1031. So I've seen some very creative things out there where people can allow that 1031 exchange to exist. But Peter, what have you seen as far as, when you get further into the life of a lease or you're looking at options, what have you seen?
Well, the 30 years is that's an important number. So having the easement, which goes along with the cash flow, be 30 years, even if there's only 15 years on the lease. And you're right, the option periods do count towards that, because again, at the end of the day, you don't know for sure whether they're going to exercise or not. So saying, look, the expectation is it's going to go 30 years, and have the easement mirror that. That's clearly important to both sides, because they're not going to you're not going to purchase it if they think the easement may go away prior to the expiration of the lease. That just doesn't work. The key is having language included is if it did terminate early and the easement is in place, but the project has gone away, you don't want to be handcuffed as a landowner saying, look, there's a third party that has a right to the solar development of the property. That somehow ties your hands as to what you might be able to do if the project winds up early. But again, the 30 years is going to be important, and whether it's making sure that the easement agreement is for 30, or doing some type of buyback where you could convey it in fee to them, the whole thing, and then have the ability to buy back at some set amount, or even $1 after the expiration of the term or its options. But that's part of it's part of doing business with the right buyers, and that's where Landgate is good about. If you have opportunities, you're posting these properties for sale, and the hope is to expose it to the market in the broadest way possible, because there are a lot of heavy hitters out there with money to spend. But at the end of the day, depending on what your client is looking for, what their goals are, if they want to sell the land and the cash flow altogether, that's not complicated, and there's probably a lot more buyers out there, for that. But if you're talking about an easement type transaction, or you're talking about something that maybe is a little bit different and maybe particular to your particular seller, that's when having the right buyers that have that flexibility is going to be important. So I think, again, you could get offers based on what Landgate's got out there, but then as a professional, kind of you weed through those and say, this is the one that's going to be able to structure the transaction that best suits your needs. The other thing I would say, and this goes to what Wayne was saying, is that if it's a 20-year initial term and there's a couple of 5-year options, and sometimes you'll see a 30-year initial term with a couple 5 years option, it's going to be, at the end of the day, probably a 30 to 40-year deal. What is amazing to me is the buyers of these cash flows will factor in value to these options. And there aren't many other real estate deals where that is true. So if you were to be buying a shopping center or some other traditional piece of commercial real estate, and you're buying it based on net operating income, and you're looking at the lease digest and saying, all right, here's the anchor tenant, which really makes this whole thing work. And they've got a 5-year lease, and then they've got 5-year options built in. And as the buyer, or even the owner of that property, and those options there's not much value to you. It's value to the tenant, because they understand what they're going to be able to lease it for. But if you're underwriting kind of the long-term cash flow of that property, you're hardly putting any value on that tenant's potential to renew that option 5-10 years from now. These solar deals are the complete opposite of that. And a lot of the transactions I've done, they're underwriting it as if it is going to 35 years. And so that there is a buyer out there that is willing to pay you $1 for the potential of getting an option payment 35 years from now. Again, it's another reason why, either as a principal that owns one of these things, you're making that decision, or as someone that's counseling a client, to say, what would you be willing, knowing that, pillow money under your pillow right now, safe rate for treasuries is around 4, meaning if you had $1 today or $100 today and you put it under, I'm going to put it in treasuries and then just wait it for 35 years. That's the benchmark, at least, for what you should be willing to expect for some present value calculation. So that there's some hedge fund or, some pension fund that's willing to pay you some amount for, some potential payment 35 years from now. You have to say, how much would I pay for the potential of receiving, some money, at some future date, compared to if I put that same amount of money in some other vehicle that is safe. It's if you're not familiar with doing like discounted cash flows or present value calculations, they're not terribly complicated, but it is extremely valuable for pointing things out to potential sellers, because all you're saying is, look, if you have X amount today and reinvested at this rate, this is what it will look like in 35 years. Or if you had somebody that were willing to pay you for some future payment, and then you discounted it back to today, what would that be worth? And the more you understand that, the easier it is for you to kind of win confidence and allow them to look at it a little bit differently.
Yep, absolutely, Peter. And I appreciate the plug. Yeah, I mean, it's what makes our business special is what we do is, we don't, again, your deals are your deals. I know there's a lot of brokers and agents on the call right now listening to Pete, and they're probably getting some thoughts right now, Peter, of, I know somebody right now who needs to know this information, but I'm not quite comfortable going and approaching that landowner. I appreciate creating the plug for Landgate is, we're the place where it hosts the listings. Like, this is where once you get that listing up, get it out there. We don't take commission. Doesn't cost anything. Get it out there, and every single buyer on the planet who wants to buy these things is going to see that deal and call your phone. But the folks right now, I want to throw a plug to you too, Peter, that might have somebody in their back pocket right now. They know that this is something that this landowner needs to know about. It's a client they had. Maybe they helped sell the piece of property, or maybe they helped lease the piece of property. And they don't want to fumble that football. They don't want to walk up to the person and have that door shut right in their face, because it's a difficult conversation to have initially with the landowners. And I think you're exactly right. It's built on trust. I want to throw a bone to you and say that, Peter, I've seen you work, especially with the NLR agents. I see quite a few NLR people on the phone, but there's some folks in this call that are not NLR agents. I've seen you work with other agents and brokers across the United States who have the network and have the relationship with some more of these deals, but it's their first time doing a rent payment type of deal in energy. And they might want to pull you in, with whatever relationships you guys have there. But I want to let everyone on the call know that Peter is a resource as well. We try to be the absolute best resource by hosting these webinars, putting as much information out there. On Landgate, you can find every single parcel that has an active turbine or solar panel on it in your state within 10, 15 seconds. Then put that in a portfolio and manage all of those things. This is not a pitch for Landgate. It's really a pitch to let you folks know what is available. And Peter's one of those resources. So I just want to let everybody in the call know that, utilize Peter. You can obviously tell he is a wealth of knowledge. He has a lot of experience with these deals. He's done deals in the past. He has deals he's working right now. He leverages Landgate, absolutely, and he does a great job with that. But I would encourage you all to leverage Peter as well, right? Obviously, you've heard of Landgate. You're here on the webinar with us. But Peter's a very good resource, and he's an individual that you guys can work with to have those conversations, to get your feet wet in these types of deals. So, Peter, I just wanted to throw that out there, and maybe you don't want me to do that, but I put you out there for a resource.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think for people that haven't done transactions like this before, the one thing that you may have that others do not is a relationship with a landowner that has one of these projects. So if you've already developed trust and they know you, that helps, because what you'll find is they probably are, if they have a project that was recently commercialized or even was commercialized a couple of years ago, they've probably been bombarded by letters, phone calls, all of these things, because it's not hard to figure out what projects are in place, and even figuring out in the queue which ones are close. That's not hard, but the noise that's created, by the ease of sending letters or calling, for brokers that have, and it's not just brokers, it could be the end, the buyer. A lot of these buying groups, they're reaching out to landowners, directly. So if you can inject yourself in a situation where they're just tired and don't even understand why these people are reaching out, and through that trust, get them to share the lease, understand the scenario, and understand kind of what their long-term motivations might be, because maybe the motivation and the desire and the attractiveness of having this income stream is it's mailbox money. And if they're farmers that have been busting it for ever and ever and ever, they like the idea of having that check arrive. And so if you're thinking about how you sell them on the idea of selling the income stream and then reinvesting it in 1031 so you can buy more farmland, to them, they may say, we may get a heck of a deal on farmland, but we're tired of farming and we like the idea of this income stream. So that's when you pivot and say a DST or some net lease investment property, which qualifies for like kind, that spins off cash and doesn't require management or time from them. You're going to steer them in that direction. So you're thinking about it from, hey, I know these people, I know what their motivations are. They're going to probably share things in a way that they're not, with somebody that just sends a letter, and then get them to share the lease, look at it, point out in a delicate manner why they think this is something that's going to accrue to their grandchildren, because they're going to get, a payment in year 40. that, hey, look, that's not guaranteed, but here's something that we can do to guarantee it. And you don't have to be a financial whiz to be able to convey that to them. You just have to have an understanding of their motivations, and then B, just kind of be able to look at a discounted cash flow statement based on the lease, and so this is a present value, and that you then could reinvest it in something else.
Very good, Peter. And then Debbie, thank you for the comment there. Yeah, this is being recorded. You guys are all going to receive the recording in this and a follow-up email. But we are at 11:50. Happy to, and I'll speak for you here, Peter, happy to open it up to any other questions that you guys have. Again, these webinars is not to sell Landgate or a product or anything like that. It's really to let you guys understand what's available and help you be more successful and expand your business into these types of deals. And again, I've said this, but I repeat myself quite a bit when there's really something that I want to stick. Peter has in the last couple of years really engulfed his business in this renewable energy space. And I think it's supplemented what he does. It doesn't fundamentally change what he does on a day-to-day basis. He still buys and sells tracks for folks, and that's what he does. But Peter, I don't want to speak for you here, but I think it's supplemented what you do on a day-to-day basis in a huge way, right? It's so difficult right now. And people do not want to sell land, right? People, for the most part, do not want to sell land. And it's very, very difficult to get folks that want to sell land. This is a way, leveraging Landgate and the information that Peter has shared here, it's a way for folks in the real estate world to work and monetize and assist landowners who do not want to sell their property. And I think, Wayne made a comment earlier. Wayne has done a phenomenal job with that by just simply picking up the phone, talking to some folks who initially were interested in carbon credits in the desert. Well, there's not much to be made in carbon credits in the desert, and ended up being that individual's land professional. And I think that's what Peter has done very well, is he's not a real estate agent in a lot of these folks' mind. Peter's a land professional. And regardless of what they need done with their land, Peter is the land professional for his network of landowners. And I think that's something that I really want to drive across. There's all different types of potential ways to work with these folks. These solar and wind rent payments is just, another way. If they don't have payments, but they have a good site, you can still work with them. You can, as Wayne said, as Peter's done, you can still work with those folks. They don't want to sell their property, but they have a really good site for battery storage, EV charging. They have a great site for oil and gas leasing. You can work, that is your client. That's not someone else's client. That's your client to work with. And you can help get those folks into a lease. There's folks within Landgate, there's folks within your organizations, there's people like Peter out there who can assist you with that and help you through your first couple deals, get cash flow on the property. And, another individual, Ronnie Richardson, the current CEO of NLR, calls it the trifecta. I think, Peter, that may have been you called it the trifecta, right? Get a landowner, get them in a lease, help them sell the lease, and help them 1031 exchange it. It's 3 deals in one. And it takes time, it takes years, but there are several folks in this call that are on the pathway to getting that trifecta done with some landowners. So if there's no questions, Peter, would anything more you'd like to let the folks know?
I guess the one other thing I would throw in there is that so just because a landowner has a lease signed with a developer, the value really isn't there until it's either been commercialized or it's imminent. So if you have a landowner that you do business with and they just recently signed an agreement or is getting ready to sign an agreement with a solar developer, there's obviously a lot of steps, and the average length of time to get a project commercialized these days is going to be 3 to 5 years. In most markets, just because it takes time. There's a lot of moving parts. I wouldn't discount the opportunity to work with them, so if you can counsel them on, and if you don't have any familiarity with, solar leases, that can be a little bit hard, but you can plant the seed early, that look, as this thing gets to the finish line, there are opportunities to sell the revenue stream and then 1031, because that gets the wheel turning, for them, the wheels turning, and they might think about, oh, if we could do that, we would reinvest in such and such, and that you do that, and that you can help them when the time comes. Because they're going to be, as it gets closer, they're going to be hit by others that are going to want to help them. And if they know you, they trust you, they know you do that, even though it might be a couple of years from now, they're going to call you first. And the hope is that, you'll be able to help them out. And then the other side of it is that, the beauty of these things is the hard work has been done. Once these leases are commercialized and the income stream starts, these transactions do not take long to close, because everything that's been accomplished over the previous 3 to 5 years, the wetlands delineation, the fee in lieu agreement, like all of these things that, were the challenges and the potential obstacles of getting the project to the finish line, they're all done. So when it comes time to selling it, the buyer's going to say, what we need is the lease agreement. We need, proof of payment, estoppel letter. I mean, it is just not hard to get them to the next step, because all the hard work was done. If there were some stumbling block, an environmental issue, the project wouldn't have been built out anyway. So, if you're doing traditional commercial deals and you know how hard it can be to get them to the closing line because of rezoning and all that stuff, these things are not that, because you are selling a project that's already approved and cash flowing.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for your time, Peter. Everyone who's joined, appreciate your time. Again, it's been recorded. You'll get that follow-up in an email. Jordan, appreciate you bearing with me through my technical difficulties and getting me online here. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to Peter. Jordan put his email in the chat there. And again, leverage Landgate, guys. If you guys ever have any questions, things like that, feel free to reach out to your client success lead, either Brooke or Thomas. Reach out to Jordan, myself, reach out to anybody at Landgate. We're excited to work with all of you guys. And Peter, again, thank you so much. You guys all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.